the master artist steps in. And you know, he can reshape the mistakes of our lives into a beautiful new picture. And if we allow him, God can use those mistakes for his good and the great good of others.
Welcome to Mission 66, your ultimate journey through all 66 books of the Bible, brought to you by Bible teacher and pastor Dr. Louis Sayao in partnership with Transworld Radio. Today, we explore the book of Judges, stories of courage, God's faithfulness, and the consequences of turning from him. Let's hear from our teacher, John Matthews, and co-host Esther Sisulu.
It is such a joy to be with you once again as we delve into this remarkable book of God. It is the Bible. And presently, we're in the Old Testament book of Judges. And today we'll look at chapters 14 and 15. Now, these chapters, they tell of the life of Samson, who we now know as God's strong man, and who led Israel as a judge for 20 years during the time of the Philistine oppression. But what we'll see in these chapters is that Samson often didn't use good judgment. And that's why our topic for today is more brawn than brains.
Esther, thank you so much. Great to be with you. And a very warm welcome to Mission 66, wherever you join us from today. Thank you for your company. Great to be with you. As Esther said there, we're continuing in the book of Judges. And the people of Israel, well, they're still living amidst Canaanites, even having conquered the promised land. Now, you may remember the command if you've been listening to Mission 66 for some time. God's command was to drive out the inhabitants, but they never finished that job. And because of failing to follow through completely on that command, the Canaanites were always to be thorns in the flesh of the Israelites because they clearly wanted to take the land back. And in our latest episodes, we learnt about the judge whose name was Jephthah and the rise as well of several more enemy nations, among which were the powerful and warlike Philistines. Now, they lived along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and they were gaining this huge advantage because they knew how to make iron weapons and chariots. So it was in that context that God raises up strength to meet strength, and Samson appears. And you know, Samson's story, it is utterly compelling. He was to be the next judge, and he was a man who became renowned as one of the strongest men who ever lived. His strength was unparalleled. It was extraordinary. You know, strength in many ways behind any possible human capability, but at a time in his life where, as Esther just mentioned there at the start, that he didn't show wisdom when it came to some major moments in his life. And so there were consequences to those choices. You know, even his birth was miraculous, announced to his parents by the angel of the Lord. So let's pick up his story as Samson reaches marrying age. This is Judges chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. And then he came up and told his father and mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, or among all our people, that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." Well, his father and mother didn't know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came towards him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hands, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. And then he went down and he talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. And after some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of that lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. And he scraped it out into his hands, and he went on eating it as he went. And he came to his father and mother, and he gave some to them, and they ate. But he didn't tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion that he had killed. Now, remember, Samson was a Nazarite from his birth, and he was not to taste any wine, he was not to cut his hair, and he wasn't supposed to touch anything dead, but yet here he is, violating his vow, scooping honey out of the carcass of a dead lion. And so that's why he doesn't tell his parents. And then verse 10 says, his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. And as soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Now that was a cultural thing, since Samson was marrying one of their Philistine women. Well, they were providing him with 30 men to accompany the groom to help him celebrate with this wedding party. But let's also not forget that the Philistines were enemies of Israel. And so God was about to use Samson in a really unusual way to get a victory over them. This is verse 12. And Samson said to them, let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what the answer is within 7 days of the feast, and you find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. And they said to him, put your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the 4th day, they went to Samson's wife and said, entice your husband to tell us what this riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? And Samson's wife wept over him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. You've put a riddle to my people, and you've not told me what it is. And he said to her, behold, I have not told my father nor my mother. Shall I tell you? And she wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted. And on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not ploughed with my heifer, you would have not found out the riddle. In other words, Samson knew that they had extorted the answer out of his wife, and so he was cross. But he wasn't very wise in telling her the riddle in the first place. Nonetheless, this is verse 19. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and he struck down 30 men of the town, and took their spoil, and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house. And Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. In short, God arranged for Samson to get this foothold in Philistine society and made it so that they'd insult him so that his anger would be aroused. And so he goes to the next town and he kills 30 of their men, brings their clothes back to pay off the men who had played him for a fool. And Samson, he's just getting started, because this is chapter 15. After some days, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. And Samson said to them, This time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. So Samson went, and he caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, and he turned them tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. Then the Philistines said, Who has done this? And they replied, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. And this is how the Philistines treated their own people. They were cruel enough to burn down the girl and her dad at the stake. And now Samson again was hot with anger. Verse 7. And Samson said to them, If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit. And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and he went down and he stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Then the Philistines came up, and they encamped in Judah, and they made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, Why have you come up against us? And they replied, We have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam, and they said to Samson, Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? And Samson said to them, As they did to me, so have I done to them. And they said to Samson, We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson replied, Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. And they said to him, No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. And so they bound him with 2 new ropes, and they brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that had caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and he put out his hand and picked it up. And with that jawbone he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. And if we move down to verse 18, it says, Samson was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord, and he said, You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water flowed out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of that place was called En-Hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day. And Samson judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So here you have these Baal-worshipping Philistines oppressing the people of Israel, oppressing the Lord's flock of Israel. And God had had enough of it. And so he's looking for ways to stop the Philistines in their tracks. And he finds a willing participant in Samson, even though Samson was far from perfect. Yet he was strong enough to go against the Philistines successfully, not once, not twice, but often, and actually in all kinds of ways. Just imagine the strength of this man. You know, there's far more to come in this fascinating story of Samson, God's incredibly powerful, brawny, lion-killing man. Let's not be too quick to judge Samson. Which of us doesn't have some character flaw, or indeed flaws, plural, that may or may not be apparent to everybody around us? Perhaps we hide it pretty well. Maybe it is apparent to those around us, but invisible to us. And you know, unless we do the work to draw close to God and become more like Him and better understand ourselves, our reactions, our history, it's really important work, that, and it's a work that is worth doing so that we can allow God to set us free from that which makes us stumble, and by the power of our human nature holds us back. Our human nature often just wants to bind us, to tie us to our past, to tie us maybe to generational patterns of behavior. God wants to do the opposite. He wants to set us free.
Well, this is Mission 66, and currently we are studying the account of Samson in the book of Judges. And man, as you said it there, John, this is a fascinating account. So much so that you may even have a couple of questions about what we've read in chapters 14 and 15. So if you'd like to have those questions answered, please do send us a message on our Facebook page at Mission 66. That is Mission 66 on Facebook. All right, John, this part about the torches tied to the foxes and then being turned loose in the wheat field, I don't know, as you were reading the account, it kind of sounded like a prank that a mischievous young boy would play on his community, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it, Esther? And it's it's almost creative mischief. It's like, well, where did he think that idea up from? And so that you almost admire the creativity, but also it seems perhaps strange to us what he did and the way that he acted. And perhaps even stranger, but we have the benefit of hindsight, don't forget, but perhaps even stranger that he then brings down a lot more trouble upon his head. So one action then leads to more trouble. So he courts a Philistine woman who was probably just as stubborn as he was, and the entire wedding ceremony turns into, chaos, really, into a scene from a movie where it just goes bad. And Samson then loses his patience, he loses the riddle, and he ends up losing the woman who was going to be his wife.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't really rationalize why he would do what he did. And perhaps here's something else that I can't quite rationalize, and that is why Samson would be attracted to the Philistine woman. I mean, surely he would have known that this was dangerous territory for him because of the Philistines' oppression of Israel.
Yeah, it's a great point, Esther, isn't it? I suppose then we think about sometimes the way our own hearts operate when we're cold from God or distant from God. And maybe then it's not so strange when we think that our hearts sometimes just bend into danger. They turn away from safety, and we're drawn in sometimes, as Adam and Eve were in the garden, to the thing that is going to bring destruction and trouble to our very front door. And I think that's part of what is happening here, because Samson is effectively more controlled by his flesh, by his human nature, than by his brains or by God's guiding spirit. And so what is he doing? Well, he's hanging around with the wrong people. And then on top of that, he goes directly against his parents' wishes. And maybe that's a bit of human nature we're seeing at play as well, where those who love us and know us best, perhaps they don't approach that in the right way. And so the way that they say, don't do that, pushes us into the very thing that they're trying to hold us back from. And so his parents say, listen, don't, why are you doing it? And so he goes and does it. Why would he think that it was a good idea to marry the enemy? Here's a Philistine woman. Besides being foreigners to Israel, we know that they were idolaters, known for their sensuality, their adornments, and perhaps it was lust that was Samson's Achilles' heel. And how often have we seen that in society? Do you know, Achilles in Greek mythology was a brave warrior who was killed by a poisoned arrow that struck him on the heel. Pretty unlikely thing to have happened. And so the expression here is proverbial, describing how an otherwise strong individual can be brought down by one weak area in his life. And at the base of his heel, perhaps the place where you thought they were least vulnerable. And so Samson is brought down by beauty, because he fails to consider other essential characteristics of a mate. He's drawn in by that huge emotion at the front of his brain. He's drawn in by his eyes. So he doesn't consider character, conduct, deep friendship, trust, loyalty, personality, or the word that perhaps encompasses all of those things that I've just mentioned, love.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But you know what I find so amazing? And I think this is testament to God's wisdom, that despite that, God used Samson's lust for this Philistine woman to free Israel from all the oppression that they were experiencing. And it's kind of hard to understand, but we know that God has a plan in this.
Yeah, absolutely. isn't it encouraging in some ways that actually God sees the Israelites being oppressed by the Philistines, and he sees Samson, and he sees a man whose heart that he can work with. What does God see? He sees his weaknesses as well. God knows that this is not going to be a smooth ride with this guy, because lust is a big thing in his story. But actually what overrides all of his human weakness, and that's quite something because we're talking about the strongest man potentially who ever lived, what overrides that is that God from the moment that he's conceived, knows that there's coming a man who just wants to follow deep down, ultimately, God's will in his life. And how encouraging is that for us? That we might think, well, I can't, God can't use me because look at what I've done. Look at who I am. Look at the stuff that I struggle with. But God knows that he can draw us to himself, that he is greater than our weaknesses. And so perhaps it surprises, even troubles some who can't understand how the Lord here was seeking an occasion as well in the bigger picture to punish the Philistines. But what many don't understand is that God uses mankind to bring about his sovereign will despite our many faults. And it's a mystery, a great mystery that we can't fully comprehend, but it's true that we sometimes do things that displease God and fall so far short of his perfection. Yet, we learn from our mistakes as much as from our successes. In fact, I think we learn far more from our mistakes, and God uses human beings to fulfill his purposes. Imagine a child trying to draw something and making all kinds of wrong lines and smudges. And then the master artist, the child's parent, steps in and draws a beautiful drawing. Imagine our lives, and imagine that perhaps we're not great at drawing, and we're not great at doing art, and yet we try our best and we draw something on a page, but it's a bit messy and there's all kinds of wrong lines and smudges. But then the master artist steps in and makes a beautiful drawing out of this pretty average offering that we have, and he actually uses the mistakes, uses even the wrong lines to form something beautiful in this new picture. And in a similar way, God, through his incredible mercy and his power, takes our failures and he reshapes them into something wonderful. Maybe those people around us can never see that. Maybe they can never believe it because they may deem the things that we've done are just too far gone, but God doesn't. And so, if we allow God to do that in our lives, regardless of what we've done, he can, and do you know what? He will use our very worst for his good.
That is so incredibly encouraging. I think a lot of us are encouraged to hear that. But I do want us now to just have a look at verse 6 of chapter 14, because here it says that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson. Now, I know we've spoken about this before, but perhaps we can repeat what we said in earlier messages about the role of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, it's an awesome image, isn't it? The Spirit of God rushing into a mortal human being. I mean, it's a powerful thing. And, the person of the Holy Spirit had a different ministry in the Old Testament than he does today. And so this is an example of it, because the Spirit would come upon a person if it was needed to fulfill God's purposes. And in Samson's case, the Spirit's power gives him this supernatural strength This strength that doesn't make sense to be confined in the body or the person of a human being, because it's enough strength to tear a lion apart as though tearing a piece of paper. It's the strength that the Spirit gave him, and it's related to the Nazirite vow. As long as Samson keeps his hair from being cut, then this strength, the strength of God himself, would remain with him. And he's able to fight large numbers of men, and we're going to see more incredible feats of strength, which Samson displays very shortly.
Well, the image that you've kind of placed in my mind is that of Samson tearing a lion apart as though he's tearing a piece of paper. Well, of course, we know that the Bible mentions lions and foxes and the like, but are these animals actually native to that region?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Esther, isn't it? Because there are no lions in that area today, but thousands of years ago, there were indeed lions in southern Canaan. For instance, the Assyrians and the Babylonians used the lion as a symbol on their shields. We're going to get to the story later on Mission 66, where David, as a young shepherd boy, again, with the Spirit's strength upon him, fights not just a lion, but a bear. And as for foxes, well, as we know, they're a little more common.
Okay, John, I want you to indulge my overactive imagination. Can you imagine we're in heaven and we're having a chat with Samson about his life? Look, earlier on you mentioned not to be overly critical of him, but I don't know, I kind of get a feeling that maybe Samson might sit us down and have a few words with us for, maybe talking about his story. I don't know.
That's right. Well, Samson, we weren't being critical of you. We yeah, no, he's not overactive at all. Isn't heaven going to be incredible? Because we'll have these incredible conversations. But actually, when we get there, the focus on our lovely Savior, Jesus Christ, is going to be overwhelming. And the things of earth, well, they'll be past, long past. And certainly the focus on what any of us did wrong or right, that'll be past as well by then. Because the focus will be on our glorious Savior and on the light and the love and the life that is emanating from him. No language on earth could begin to describe that. It is unfathomable, but we know that it will be glorious beyond measure.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for that explanation. Now, I suppose we can move on now to our summary of this episode.
Yeah, let's do that. Chapters 14 and 15 here, Esther, of the book of Judges, they're part of the account of Samson, this man who had supernatural strength given to him by God to accomplish purposes which God had ordained, but he lacks discernment. He lacks discernment in choosing his friends, and too often he lets his human passion overrule his better judgment. Certainly not the only one in the Bible who acts impulsively and gets into trouble. Certainly not, unlike many of us in our time and day now. And, we've encountered people, haven't we, who abandon the church, perhaps, or the Christian faith because they've seen someone serving God yet behaving inappropriately. Or maybe you felt disappointed in yourself despite knowing that you've got this gift or a calling from God. But we may have trouble controlling our base desires. Well, look, the account of Samson lets us know that we're not the only ones who ever struggled with our human imperfections. But the example of Samson, well, it can be instructive to us to develop our minds, to think before we act, to learn from our mistakes, to see that what often lures us in is dangerous and can destroy, and sometimes can destroy what follows in terms of generational impact. But God is able, to overcome that. And every Christian is given a spiritual gift, whatever that is. It might be teaching, encouraging, or sometimes it might be special powers of discernment or unusual faith or an ability to know just what to do in a difficult situation. But having a spiritual gift, it's no guarantee of good judgment. That is something that comes the more we become like Jesus Christ. The more we spend time in this, His Word, the more we mature, the more our prayer for wisdom becomes a reality. And remember this, we nearly always learn so much more from our mistakes than from our successes.
Well, that is all that we have for you today, friends. But we encourage you to join us same time, same place as we go deeper into the book of Judges from the Old Testament. Well, of course, I'm Esther for John Matthews and our entire team saying, see you next time on Mission 66.
Let me remind you to head on over to mission66.org to download your study guide. It's free. Dive deeper into the Bible teaching of John Matthews and learn how it all relates to your Christian walk. Tag along with John and Esther on our Bible road trip episode by episode. Your study guide's waiting for you at mission66.org. That's where you can also post your questions or make a comment, and even help out with a donation to keep Mission 66's heart beating around the world. Hop on over to mission66.org. Mission 66 is a partnership of TWR and the ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao.